the vindication. God bless us. We want to welcome everyone to the Social Action Town Hall for April. Is it April or is it May? It is May.
That's May.
It's May. And we have an interesting topic this evening. And we met these two young ladies when Reverend Boyd and Clergy Against Racism. We had the Good Friday walk, and yes. These two young ladies were there joining us in that walk, and the rest is history. Start talking, and some good things happened from there. So I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Boyd to introduce our two guests. Reverend Boyd.
All right, thank you, Sister Rita. Truly, I thank you for pulling this together. I asked you to touch bases with Miss Crawford, and you did. You didn't waste any time, and I thank you for that. Look like they're slow coming on, but I think we'll get more on this evening. So I am happy to introduce these two young ladies who, reading their bio, they're doing a great work, and one that sometimes I feel that our communities and the Black community and the communities of color and low income just never have an idea of how important this work is, and how in our neighborhoods and communities sometimes we're so often stuck in the midst or somewhere around pollution or dump sites. And also I was happy to meet Miss Crawford. I don't remember meeting Miss Jones. I may have on that day, but I'm glad to see her this evening. So I'm looking forward to this, and it's good to have Pastor Hodge on, and if there's another minister on that I'm not seeing, then you're welcome. But so let me move with introducing, starting with Mr. Crawford, Kendyl Crawford, the former Richmond Conservation Program Coordinator for the Sierra Club, Virginia Chapter. Kendyl Crawford has worked on community organizing around climate change and toxic pollution. She has spent time closely organizing with faith communities around the state. She received a bachelor's degree in marine and environmental science from Hampton University in 2012, and has a master's of science in environment, science and society from University College, London, where she conducted research on social movement organizations mobilizing around air pollution in London on a Marshall Scholarship. In 2015, she successfully completed the Midwest Academy Organizing for Social Change training. In 2018, she received a Master's of Nonprofit Studies degree at the University of Richmond and was chosen to be student commencement speaker representing her class. Kendyl is also a member of the NAACP and has volunteered for several organizations, including Chesapeake Climate Action Network and the City of Hampton Clean City Commission. Kendyl also sits on the board of the Virginia Conservation Network. So Kendyl, we welcome you.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to you, and you have an impressive resume. Now let me introduce Ms. Leah Jones. Leah Jones joined the Virginia Interfaith Power and Light as Faith Community Outreach Coordinator in 2020, graduating from William and Mary with a degree in biology and environmental science and policy in 2019. She is an enthusiastic advocate for environmental and racial activism. During her college career, she developed a passion for intersectional environmental issues, specifically those pertaining to food security and climate justice. After her experience with Environment Virginia as an intern in 2016, she made it a priority to be an environmental educator and activist for her community. Leah believes her purpose is to shed light on existing issues of environmental racism and do anything she can to reclaim green space for Black people and other marginalized communities. So my brothers and sisters, I present to you these two fine young ladies and with great resumes, Miss Kendyl Crawford and Miss Leah Jones. God bless you.
Amen.
Thank you so much for that introduction.
You're so welcome.
It is great to meet everyone here. And I haven't met anyone yet. I just joined the VIPL team last year. So It's good to get FaceTime with everyone via Zoom. But today we're gonna talk about the intersections of faith and environmental justice. Thank you for joining us for this presentation today. We've titled, I Can't Breathe. So we'll dive more into why we can't breathe and as it relates to the environment and how our faith also connects to that struggle to breathe.
Yes.
So let's get rolling.
All right.
So a little bit more about VIPL, our vision and our mission. We are people of faith who are collaborating to grow healthy communities and advance climate justice through education, advocacy, and worship. And we empower all faith communities across the Commonwealth of Virginia to achieve sustainable living through various methods. So that's about us. Now to help center us and get us ready for this discussion, this session, webinar, Kendyl is going to lead us in a meditation by Johns Weldon Johnson's.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Leah. So normally we like to kind of open up our presentations just with a centering moment. And so I just want to invite everyone just to take a breath. Feel free to close your eyes. If not, that's all right as well. And again, this is a poem. It's called The Creation by James Weldon Johnson, who we know wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing. So take a deep breath. And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. And far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything. Blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. Then God smiled and the light broke. And the darkness rolled up on one side and the light stood shining on the other. And God said, that's good. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands. And God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set that sun ablazing in the heavens. And the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world, and God said, that's good. Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand, and the moon was on his left. The stars were clustered about his head, and the earth was under his feet. And God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. Then he stopped and looked and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world and he spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes and the lightnings flashed. He clapped his hands and the thunders rolled and the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Then the green grass sprouted and the little red flowers blossomed. The pine trees pointed his finger to the sky. And the oak spread out his arms. The lakes cuddled down in the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea. And God smiled again. and the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Then God raised his arm and waved his hand over the sea and over the land. And he said, bring forth, bring forth. And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forests and the woods, and split the air with wings. And God said, that's good. Then God walked around, and God looked around on all that he had made. He looked at his sun, and he looked at his moon, and he looked at his little stars, and he looked on his world with all its living things. And God said, I'm lonely still. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. By a deep, wide river, he sat down. With his head in his hands, God thought and thought, till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river, he kneeled him down. And there the great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corner of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hand, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay, till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it, he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
So that was James Weldon Johnson's The Creation, a very powerful poem. I just wanted to take a moment here just for silent reflection, just for you to reflect back on the poem and your own experience of nature.
I wanted to first say, where were you when I had to memorize this when I was 6 years old? A lot of us had to memorize this one. And as soon as you start going, oh my goodness, there it is. But just reflecting on just hearing it, and when I heard the word clay, I'm going, powerful stuff, because he made us, he shaped us from clay, and when we die, we go back to that clay.
Yep.
God also says, seek my face early in the morning. And I'm a runner, and early in the morning when I'm out there running and it's just peaceful, it's a gift. We've had several Bible studies talking about this, the miracles of God, and just between, when spring is just coming in, it's short of a miracle. It's a miracle. It's just miraculous to see a flower coming up, and that's from a seed,
right?
And all of that, and that beautiful nature of God.
Wonderful, wonderful. Were other folks reminded of any experiences with nature? Or?
I'm like Sister Willis. I'm out in the mornings, and if I'm not at the gym, I'm outside walking, and I'm just always impressed with the just to feel the air early in the morning, and it feels so pure and different than what it feels later in the day after everything and all the pollution and everything that's filled. So it's just a great feeling, and it usually oftentimes inspire me just to pray as I walk and thank God for what I see, the trees blowing, even if it's winter time, then just the crisp air that's hitting the limbs of the trees, and just viewing all that God has created and put us in charge of. And then the depressing thing is, to me, is how we have failed as humans to discharge our duty of taking care of all of this that God has blessed us with. And so it's that poem and to read the creation in Genesis is always inspiring, always inspiring.
Does anyone else want to share?
I'll share just for a moment because I really resonated with the thoughts that you both shared. I love waking up in the morning too. I love waking up to the birds. It gives you a chance before your brain starts moving. I think that's also another piece of it, before your mind and then your day really starts going, and you know you become filled with thoughts and the things you need to do for the day. It gives you a time just to realize that you are bigger than yourself. Yes. Like you are somewhere bigger than yourself, and you are actually very small, you know, that life is happening all around you, not just as a person, but to really feel, you know, the, I guess, earth breathe and wake up along with you. It's beautiful, and something that can help center me anyways.
That's true.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for sharing. And again, I just think it's wonderful to start off with a centering moment to just kind of just be for a little bit before we get into the presentation.
Great.
So now transitioning into that presentation, we like to start off with the outline. So first of all, we'll have a little bit more personal reflection. Then we'll dig into a little bit of creation care theology. After that, we'll talk some about connecting racial justice with climate justice. Following that, Leah will share some examples about what environmental justice looks like in Virginia. And then after that, we'll conclude with some ways that you all can take action as a congregation and as individuals as well. Okay, so starting off with that personal reflection. I'm hoping that we'll have a little bit of time at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to share some questions to kind of hold in your mind throughout the presentation. Hopefully we'll have time for discussion, but if not, these are great questions to kind of think about after the presentation's over, just for some reflection, personal reflection. So how does caring for creation connect with your faith and your personal values? First question. Then the second one, how has your family or community connected with the surrounding environment? And how do these experiences connect with the broader movement for racial justice? Great.
Okay, so now we're going to dive into the actual presentation and talk about creation care theology. So just to begin, here up on the screen is a list that we wanted to share. Virginia Interfaith Power Light is an interfaith organization. So this list here is just quotes related to caring for the environment from sacred texts in various faiths. What's important to take away here when you take in this list is that we and the people who have paved the way for the interfaith environmental work have found that just about pretty much every faith tradition has something to say about celebrating and protecting the earth, no matter what language or faith it is. But today we'll be focusing on environmental racism and justice as well. But notice in all of these faiths, we are called to care for creation. Waiting for it to come. There we go. So along with, some of the things that unite these, unite some of the principles that we all have across these different faiths are listed here. We've listed just 3. These were based on a resource from Green Faith, this other organization. They collected information from 5 main faith groups, being Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism, and these things all ring true across the faiths. The first principle being climate justice and environmental justice are moral challenges. We have a moral obligation not to harm others, not to harm our neighbors, to be fair, and to really care for the poor and those who are vulnerable and disproportionately impacted by environmental degradation, right? Especially because oftentimes those most affected by environmental degradation are already marginalized communities who are carrying multiple burdens. Another uniting principle across faiths is that creation and the natural world are gifts of which we have the responsibility for being stewards of. As we've already mentioned before, this isn't just a moral challenge, but it's also a responsibility for us as people of faith. The divine is all around us. The birds, when we wake up in the morning, the flowers blooming, like Rita mentioned, it's all around us. It's a part of us. We are a part of that divine. And caring for the natural world is an act of worship. So that is also something that is very important across all faiths. Along with this, a final principle is that we live our faith through the actions we take. And this is across the board, right? It's not just about words, it's about action. How are we saying that we do care about the environment, we care about our neighbors and the places that they live, and how the environment impacts their health and things like that? But how are we taking action to make sure that is actually the case? So by taking action, we are creating a fairer world, caring for our neighbors, and also making a personal commitment to reaffirm our faith and share the good word, right? Share what we know about environmentalism, about climate justice with our neighbors, and, you know, rally the troops, right? And continue this effort to help inspire others and build a value-based world. So yes. I'll pass it to Kendyl now to share some more, a more AME specific take on creation care.
Yeah, so the thing that I think is cool about the AME denomination are, you know, its roots. So, you know, if you think about the founding of the AME Church, it grew out of the Free African Society, which provided aid and empowered freed slaves, empowered Black people, and empowered poor people, folks who desperately needed the help. And so the other thing that I really think is really cool about the AME tradition is the roots. The roots also connect back to Africa. So in the early 1890s, you know, that's when the AME tradition was crossed the Atlantic and actually was established in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and South Africa. And when we're thinking about, you know, Africa and African cosmology and creation, it begins with the earth and God together. There's not, you know, a dualism like in the West with kind of the earth way over here and God way over here and people way over here and nature way over here. There's an understanding of the inherent connection. There is an understanding that, you know, we as people, you know, are a part of nature, and earth is kind of an incarnate of God. And so unfortunately, this is something that kind of has been lost over the generations of being colonized, kind of lost that connection. But Again, one of the really exciting things about the AME tradition is that because of its roots, it has a really good chance of kind of recovering this connection. And then transitioning over to some values, as Leah just mentioned, talking about the interfaith concepts, and Reverend Boyd, you mentioned this as well with your reflection after the poem, just the concept of, environmental stewardship, to have a meaningful relationship with God, we need to care for the earth. It's a part of serving God. And then the other value, of course, John chapter 13, verse 34, Jesus commands us to love one another. So that's another value, caring for our neighbors. And so, of course, when you have a situation where you have, polluted air or toxins, polluted water everywhere, these are risks to our health. These are threats to our neighbors. And especially when you think about our vulnerable neighbors, like children or the elderly or the sick, these are, real risks to health. And then kind of the last thing I wanted to mention here is, when we're thinking of our neighbors, it's also important for us to think of future generations. My grandmother always said to me, you should aim to leave a place, better than when you found it. So again, it kind of echoes that value of stewardship. And so let's transition to a little scripture connected to creation care. So Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. And the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. Psalm chapter 24, verses 1 and 2. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. And then there's also Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Basically, treat people in the same way that you want people to treat you. And so I'll pass it over to Leah.
Oh, we just wanted to take this moment now to see if you all had any other scriptures or concepts that come to mind for you after taking in what we shared about creation care and environmental stewardship. Or even just how are you all relating to the concept of creation care, those who haven't shared already.
Well, I don't want to be the one that does all the talking, but and preachers just have a reputation for talking, I guess. But I was thinking about when you mentioned the command of Jesus to love one another as he has loved us. And I often use that, and it can be used in many different frameworks of life. That when I'm talking to people, and this is one, most people probably never would think about using that in an environmental situation, but it really does show when Jesus commands us to love one another, that the way we take care of the environment, it also, is shows how much we really value that command that Jesus has given us. And it said that love just covers a multitude of everything. And so it does. If you truly love, as Jesus says, then you love your neighbor enough to protect your neighbor from pollution and you really, and so it makes me understand now even more how important love is and why Jesus used that, because everything is centered around that. Everything is built around that love. It's good to see the AME information up here. I hope that my members that's on this evening will take notice of that, and to show that the AME is also interested. The AME Church is interested in protecting the environment.
Any other thoughts? Well, and on that note, so the AME, there was an AME climate resolution that passed actually way back in 2016. And as a part of the resolution, it's really exciting because it's centered around action. And so, you know, there's 4 actions that are associated with the resolution. They center around urging leaders and ministries to engage with their communities and elected officials. They center around you know, taking action and promoting solutions that will help families and communities help build stronger communities. And also there's a commitment to becoming climate literate. And so I guess just by inviting us to speak today, we have taken some of those steps towards doing all of those things. Next slide. And this is another resource that I wanted to highlight real quick. So there's a great AME climate guide for getting started. It's literally called Getting Started with Climate Solutions, a guide for the AME Church. And I just wanted to see if folks had heard about this resource. Had folks heard about it beforehand?
Yes, well, I was at that, was a delegate at that conference in Philadelphia that year.
Awesome, awesome.
And well, I've heard about it too.
Oh, good.
And basically too, especially with our communities and water and lead and different things still being in our homes and in our water.
Excellent, excellent. And so for those who perhaps haven't heard of it, it's an excellent place to get started. There are tips for how to engage your congregation, for exploring kind of the broader network around faith and climate, and then also just kind of steps to start reducing your waste and start reducing pollution within the congregation as well. And the very last thing that the very last AME resource that I wanted to point out was just the AME Climate Solutions Letter, which just explains why the AME Church is leading on this issue. Okay, next slide. So we're transitioning into connecting racial and environmental justice. And then I'm doing that by a video, which I think is very helpful. Leah, we can't hear it.
Okay, I was muted, y'all. My bad.
In America, air and water are separate but unequal. Environmental racism is the new Jim Crow. Yeah, I get it. The environment isn't a person. How can it be racist? But the most basic pieces of the environment, the air we breathe and the water we drink, are controlled and designed by people. And people can be racist. More than half of all people who live close to hazardous waste are people of color. Floodplains nationwide have high populations of Blacks and Hispanics. Black children are twice as likely to suffer from lead poisoning as white children. This inequality is no accident. Pollution and the risk of disaster are assigned to Black and brown communities through generations of discrimination and political neglect. Enslaved Africans were commodities partly because their work carried environmental risks that were unacceptable to whites, like exposure to heat, malaria, and mosquitoes. As Jim Crow laws created racial segregation, they also reinforced an environmental system that still disadvantages minorities. It's no wonder that Black and Hispanic children have the highest rates of asthma, or that hurricanes like Katrina, Sandy, and Matthew did their worst damage in communities of color. Rich white neighborhoods can update their water pipes, not places like Flint. The Jim Crow laws are dead and gone, but the fact that people of color are still more likely to die from environmental causes is no accident.
Thanks, Leah.
In America, air and water are separate.
Great. So we just heard a little bit about environmental racism. And this week, it was the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And we all know, one of the sayings coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement is I can't breathe. And so just kind of reflecting on, I can't breathe. And there are just many forms of oppression, just kind of like there are many, branches of a tree, but the root, is still the same. The root is still racism in this case. So whether we're looking at, police brutality or the school to prison pipeline or, an asthma attack next to a smokestack, it all has that same root of racism. So transitioning into the next, kind of the next section of the presentation, I wanted to give an example of, one of the largest environmental problems facing the world, facing society today, and just highlight some of the justice implications specifically for Black folks. So the case study is climate change. So a little bit about the science. I won't stay here very long, but when we're thinking about climate change, it's good to have kind of a basic understanding of what it is. So when you're thinking about climate change, we're thinking about carbon pollution. And right now, the primary sources of carbon pollution, like carbon dioxide, you may have heard that term before, or methane, are transportation. 29%, it makes up 29% of our carbon pollution in the United States, the transportation sector, also electricity production, so just generating electricity for us to be able to flip on the lights. That generates about another 25% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And some other big contributors are industry, the commercial and residential sector, and then also agriculture. And so we're talking about carbon pollution because it stays in our atmosphere. Burning fossil fuels is pumping a lot more carbon pollution into the atmosphere. And that is making kind of the heat trapping blanket of our atmosphere more dense. With more carbon dioxide, the Earth's blanket is trapping more heat. You may think of it like a blanket that's transforming from like a light cotton blanket into, a heavy down blanket. It's trapping in more and more heat, and we can't kick the blanket off. And so this graph, it shows kind of how temperatures have been rising since the 1880s alongside carbon dioxide concentrations. And so that's one of the greenhouse gases, or that's one of the carbon pollution that we talked about earlier. And this is a pretty famous graph chart. And so why is this a problem? Why is it a problem that, it's getting a little bit warmer? It's an issue because many things are kind of connected on the theme of connection. So on this slide, it says warming atmosphere leads to more extreme weather. So some areas can see intense flooding and other areas can be in intense drought. Next slide. On the next slide, you'll see that the warmer temperatures can cause glaciers to melt. So that can cause, sea levels to rise. Next slide. And so kind of the main point here is that, to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we must keep the rise below 2 degrees, but really folks are saying 1.5 degrees now. And how do we do that? By limiting carbon pollution, those greenhouse gases that I talked about at the beginning that are kind of making our blanket hotter and hotter. So I wanted to spin, I won't go, this is a pretty heavy slide. There's a lot of information here, but I won't go into detail for all of these things. I just wanted to kind of share just the magnitude of climate impacts that we are actually already experiencing in some cases, and in other cases will be experiencing, or they will be worsening in the future. So rising seas and increased coastal flooding. So my hometown is Hampton, part of Hampton Roads. Folks are already seeing, issues with, sunny day flooding, longer and more damaging wildfire seasons. It feels like every single year now, California is having, the worst fire season yet. And that's just kind of by watching the news. More destructive hurricanes. Again, it feels like every year it's like this is the second most powerful, this is the third most powerful, this is the first most powerful storm. And this is just kind of by watching the news. So I won't go through all of the impacts here. But I just wanted to get you a sense of like how things are interconnected. And so by just doing this one simple thing of like emitting carbon pollution, it's a kind of a cascade of multiple impacts, many of them very, very negative. One that I will pull out here is that the Pentagon has actually declared climate change to be a conflict and threat multiplier. And so, in terms of thinking about, migration and folks moving from one places to another, the Pentagon has, said that, because of these migrations, because of the instability that all of these shifts are because all these shifts are happening, it's putting stress on political systems, which could, multiply threats, multiply conflict. So again, I won't spend too much time here, but just wanted you to get the sense of it's not just the temperature rising up, it's, disruptions to food pattern, food supplies, it's melting ice, it's, severe droughts, it's a plethora of different impacts. And so what is the impact of all of this on Black folks? Well, we've already seen it. So this is Hurricane Katrina in 2005. We know that it caused over 1,800 deaths, and really, many of the New Orleans residents, many of the Black residents were forced to leave their homes, including, 1/3 of New Orleans residents, Black residents who never returned. Even worse, if you think about those 1,800 people who died, more than half of those who perished after Hurricane Katrina, were Black. So there's a great quote here from Dr. Robert Bullard, who's actually the father of environmental justice. And he says, race and geographical location dictates who gets the resources first. After Katrina, people realize that waiting for the government can be a hazard to your health. And so kind of the basics, African Americans, climate and climate justice. So when you think about it, Black communities are more susceptible to severe weather and flooding. More than half of Black folks in the US live in the South. And the South, of course, is an area that will continue to see stronger hurricanes and increased flooding from climate change. If you also think about neighborhoods near toxic plants, like Superfund sites or industry, we've already seen, for example, with Hurricane Harvey, independent monitors found that, the chemical plants released cancer-causing benzene at rates 6 times higher than safe levels during a flood, flooding caused by Hurricane Harvey. And we also know that, history has a big role to play in this. Historic segregation resulted in African Americans living in less desirable, low-lying and flood-prone areas, from the beginning. And I won't even get into like insurance rates, like disparities and all of that. Climate change also worsens air quality. And we know when we think about air quality, think about, diseases like asthma. We also know that Black people have a almost 3 times higher chance of going to the hospital or dying from an asthma attack than white people. You know, Black children are more likely to go to the emergency room for asthma than white people. And again, air quality is slated to get worse with climate change. When you think about, you know, it getting hotter, climate induced heat waves also disproportionately affect Black communities. You know, if you look at the counties with large African-American populations, they're already exposed to extreme temperatures 2 to 3 more days per year than those counties with smaller African-American populations. And by 2050, these same counties with high populations of Black folks are projected to experience about 20 more extreme heat days per year. And we all know that, you know, extreme heat is very bad. You know, it can cause a plethora of health issues. And then of course, doctors are recognizing this, and they're recognizing that, you know, climate change is already having a negative impact on the health of Black people, and that it will continue to do so. Just thinking about, you know, things I've already mentioned, you know, asthma, you know, strokes, and then also if you think about allergies, I don't know if folks suffer from allergies. I suffer from allergies, but because of the change in temperatures, allergies are due to get worse. So it's just a plethora of health effects. And then I guess I'll end on, so when white America sneezes, Black America catches pneumonia, and that's the same, that holds true for this case study of climate change and how it will impact, or how it is impacting Black communities. And then before I hand it off to Leah, I just want to leave you with a little food for thought before the end of this section that's kind of thinking about how we're linking climate justice and racial justice. There's an excellent article in The Root. It came out kind of a while ago now, but I still think it's very relevant. I encourage you to jot down the name of it. It's Racism in the Air You Breathe, When Where You Live Determines How Fast You Die. I encourage folks to read it after the presentation today, but it brought up a number of important themes, important to just the movement and this discussion and this work in the Black community. And so, you know, for instance, we do have immediate concerns that seem more pressing right now. Environmental racism is a slower, less dramatic process than someone getting shot by police. These are quotes pulled from the article. Another interesting thought: environmental issues have always been perceived as something white people and hippies do. White environmentalists talk about saving the rainforest, but no mention is ever made of saving the lives of those who dwell in America's concrete jungle. And with that, I will turn it over to Leah to talk more about the concept of environmental justice in some Virginia case studies.
Thanks, Kendyl. Okay, so diving more now into how we see environmental justice in our own backyards, in our own communities here in Virginia and even Jackson Ward. I'm starting with the video as well, specifically from the AME Church, titled Loving Our Neighbor, and they're sharing why climate solutions and seeking climate solutions and acting on climate justice is important. So enjoy.
I think the important thing, which always governs me, is social action.
The AME Church has always been on the cutting edge for our people. And this is one we have to be on the cutting edge for.
Unclean air adversely affects us in many ways, particularly respiratory problems. You see that more in people.
Now hurricane season is longer and the hurricanes are coming more strongly.
Since we're in the cities, we have a shortage of water. And most of our dams are in the southern part of the country where there's low rainfall.
We've had floods in places that have never had flooding problems. Many of our churches are finding that foundations are being undermined and wiped away.
Environmental racism is one of the things that impacts us, disproportionately impacts people of color and Black folks more than others. Pollution really is the hardest on people who are in low economic areas. The AME Church has several unifying agendas. This is one of those human rights agendas that brings us together. Everybody deserves to have fresh and clean water, fresh and clean air.
I don't believe you can separate care for the environment from faith.
As people, we're involved in the everyday activities of the world. And so whatever happens in society, whatever happens in the environment, that affects us.
We have an awesome responsibility. Every facet of our church life has got to help people to become consciously aware of the environment.
First thing we need to do through preaching, teaching, and other means is to really inform and motivate our people.
There are many AMEs who are well positioned to do something about it and to have a voice in the decisions that government happens to be making that will affect climate change.
More than 51% of the African American community is in church on Sunday. We have a perfect opportunity to teach people how to green up their homes by demonstrating how we green up our sanctuaries and practice good habits.
I don't see why we couldn't have a climate change Sunday, where we would have a litany read in congregations, where we would talk about climate change, give information.
We teach us in church, the Sunday schools, they do it. When we have their quizzes, some of those questions are on environment, so that they are aware and can impact on the other children that don't go to church.
Lift those hands all over the building.
Blessed Tomorrow has already gathered partners who have history with this topic, who have rich stories to tell about what it means to come together.
I'm not only excited about it, I'm also determined to do all that I can to see that this works.
I am what I believe, down in my heart.
Words.
And the words I speak from the mouth will shape my destiny.
Okay, so environmental justice. Ooh. These videos get me every time. Let us start over. So environmental justice, we've said it a lot today, but we haven't actually defined it just yet. So we're gonna break the definition down a bit more following these slides, but let's just first look at the definition real quick as a whole, just surface level. So environmental justice is defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So like I said, we're gonna go a bit more into breaking what the different parts of this definition mean in actuality. But first, just generally speaking, when we talk about environmental justice, we are referring to the fight and consistent failures of our governmental systems to maintain safe, healthy, and clean environments, traditionally in communities of color. due to unjust environmental industry use, laws and regulations. And like we've seen before and discussed earlier in the presentation, we see that traditionally communities of color and other marginalized communities are left out of the decision-making process and locked out of really any meaningful involvement when it comes to developing and enforcing actual environmental laws, actual environmental policies. And as a result of that, many of these communities are faced with threats to their safety and their health, like asthma or not having access to clean water. So now we're gonna break it down a little bit. This definition that was also on the other slide is the official definition from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Once again, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of every person. Now this time, let's pay attention to the words that are emphasized, bolded, and underlined. So the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of every person, regardless of race, color, national origin, income, faith, or disability. So when we think about that, I immediately think about how, much like in other policy areas that exist in this country, discrimination is apparent and does not always serve and benefit all communities equally, right? So we see inherently almost right away that this issue, that environmental justice is not just about environment alone, it is intersectional. It's about social justice, it's about racial justice, and they can't exist without one another. The overarching goal when we think about environmental justice and seeking it in theory is to develop an effective framework that really addresses this discrimination that our communities are facing across the country and the state, and really pull these communities out of those, I guess, polluted environments, really give folks the opportunity to live healthy, regular lives, right? Like many other white communities. So an important point to also note here is that it's not about putting the burdens on another community, right? It's about finding the solutions so that we don't cause harm to any of our neighbors. So breaking it down a bit further, waiting for the computer to catch up with me. Ooh. So fair treatment, that was one of the words that were underlined and emphasized in the definition on the last slide. It's defined also by the EPA, fair treatment, in their official statements of what environmental justice means and what fair treatment means, that no segment of the population should face a disproportionate burden from the environmental consequences of industry, business, or government policies. And we know that, right? We know that in an ideal world, that is how it should be. But in many cases, that is not. We don't see fair treatment. And we also don't see meaningful involvement. And that typically entails, once again, in an ideal world, communities having the opportunity to participate in decisions that can affect their health or environment. The public can impact the agencies making these larger decisions about their own communities, as well as concerns, the concerns that people voice will be considered in the larger decision-making process genuinely, right? Not just, I'm gonna listen to you, but not really do anything about it. And lastly, decision makers reach out to and facilitate the involvement of those potentially affected, which I think is a really important piece to note here, and is what oftentimes gets neglected when larger governmental environmental agencies are working with everyday communities. They say we are treating people fairly, and we are trying to have meaningful involvement with our community members. We told them that that a town hall was happening, that a hearing, a board meeting was happening for them to show up and voice their concerns. But oftentimes people don't even hear about it. Why is that, right? People don't get the chance to genuinely hear about it, or they hear about it too late. So they're not able to actually voice their concerns that they want, or they may not understand. And because these, oftentimes the communities who are affected by these decisions the most don't normally have a lot of economic power or a lot of political power, these voices are oftentimes left behind when making these important environmental decisions about what is existing in their own communities, what is happening in their own communities. And like the video mentioned about environmental racism being the new Jim Crow, in my opinion, I feel like it is done purposefully. So these are all important things to keep in mind when we think about environmental justice, and even how it's defined by the EPA. It's our job to hold them accountable to that, right? So, yeah. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, these issues are intersectional. We can't talk about environmental justice without talking about environmental racism. And environmental racism was primarily built upon the Jim Crow era and redlining policies. We see that as a result of that, like we mentioned earlier, there's a disproportionate amount of burdens and few benefits in communities of color, in addition to what people of color already face, right? We are now also faced with the fact that we maybe will not be able to breathe because of law enforcement, because of police, but I'm also not able to breathe because a facility is near my house polluting my air, and my children can't breathe properly. They have asthma. So some other ways that this shows up, I know we've already mentioned a few already, but I just mentioned zoning in Black communities for toxic polluting industries, or landfills and dumps ending up in Black communities because it's zoned that way. Another example is continued exemption of farm workers from minimum wage increases. Another is citing new pipeline and energy production industry pollution near indigenous lands. And a last example is underfunding public transportation, limiting access for riders to employment, housing, cultural, and shopping opportunities. So when we think about just these examples listed here, and there are even more, right? But that really shapes the quality of life, doesn't it? It alters the way that you live, and puts living to survive, like gives living to survive a whole nother meaning. When we considering all these things on top of the struggles that marginalized communities already face, and then the struggles that we face just as regular everyday humans, right? So now talking more about specific examples that exist in our communities, making it more tangible. I added some photos here from a couple of communities that I wanted to share with you all in case you didn't already know or hear about them. So this first photo here at the top left is a photo of a landfill in Charles City County, Virginia. This community here is predominantly Black, and also has a fair amount of Native person percentage. So an indigenous and a predominantly indigenous and Black population. And this community, in addition to the landfill, they have multiple burdens being piled up, and specifically environmental burdens being piled up. In addition to the landfill, they also have been fighting multiple compressor stations and power plant facilities, pipelines, fighting against those. They are a great group. Hopefully, we can share more about them later. But another community facing similar facing similar struggles is the Brown Grove community in Hanover, Virginia. That's a little bit closer, even a little bit closer to home, depending on where you live. Much like Charles City County, they are also facing multiple burdens, environmental burdens, have multiple environmental fights going on right now. One being landfills, industry wanting to bring in landfills that have segmented. In addition to that, they also have are fighting a construction battle, or have fought a construction battle of the I-95 interstate. They've extended that through that community, segmenting, there we go, the land that they live on for historically years. And Brown Grove is a community that's been there and taken a hold ever since the Civil War. So in a way, I feel like it's sacred, especially as a Black person, I feel, where you've lived for generations being segmented and broken apart because of an interstate. And now the fight that they're facing is that the Wegmans distribution center is actually trying to take hold in their community and be built. So they are actually suing the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality right now and the State Water Control Board over approving the permit for the Wegmans distribution center to begin that construction. So these are all ongoing fights that are happening in local communities around us right now. And so we think when we consider all of these things that do exist in our communities just around the way, right? Just around the corner, let's now think about all of the pollution that is showing up because of the landfills, because of the pipelines that exist in these communities, and all of the other industry infrastructure. So as we, those were just a couple of real-time examples. We've already mentioned a couple of the other ways that climate change disproportionately impacts communities of color. Asthma, we mentioned, old rusty pipes. I heard someone mention lead being in pipes, along with less energy efficient infrastructure. A lot of the times people in the homes that people of communities of color live in have less energy efficient infrastructure, which leads to higher energy bills. And then the last important example is actually heat islands, urban heat islands. And does anyone know what a heat island is? No? Okay, so right here is actually this awesome resource that I wanted to share with you all from the New York Times. I think they actually did it along with the University of Virginia, or not Virginia, the University of Richmond. It is a live interactive map that shows the ways in which redlining and Jim Crow era has affected environmental, the environment of urban neighborhoods here in Richmond. And Jackson Ward is one of them. So here we see this map. In the 1930s, federal officials redlined these neighborhoods in Richmond, Virginia, marking them as risky investments because they were Black. And you see, these are all of the areas that were redlined back in the 30s. And right now, today, these are some of the hottest parts in the city in the summer, because they have fewer trees and abundance of heat trapping pavement with less green space, with less trees in the city. It gives the earth, or makes the temperature hotter, right? Because there's nothing to soak up all of that heat, and there's no shading. So I think in comparison to that, you see white neighborhoods that weren't redlined tend to be much cooler even to today. Right, exactly. And I'm going to stop here, but that is the main point, right? When we think about what does that mean for the communities dealing with that, right? Higher electric bills, probably because of the AC, it's hotter outside, less energy efficient infrastructure, higher energy bills, along with there being less green space, less ways for you to take in fresh air and all that good stuff. So please feel free to check out that resource again later. I didn't get to go through it all. And this here is just a chart of various environmental justice issues going on across the state of Virginia. This list is from 2018, but I imagine it hasn't changed much since then, if not gotten worse. So please also feel free to check that out. Now let's talk about taking action. We've heard about all of the bad stuff happening and all of the injustice. What can we do about it? So some easy ways to take action are first connecting with us, learning with us, but also connecting with your local legislators and tapping in and bugging them and getting on their nerves and letting them know that you care about these environmental justice issues and you care about making sure that your neighbors have healthy environments. Another important way to take action is voting in every election, even the one that's upcoming now, the local elections. You can be a faith climate justice voter in all of these elections, meaning that you're voting with the environment in mind. Are your local legislators who are on the ballot supportive of environmental justice policies? Making the effort and doing your research on that. And we actually also have a pledge going around for those who want to take a pledge to say that they are going to be a faith climate justice voter, and they will commit to voting with the environment in mind every time. So there's a link to that as well if you're interested in taking the pledge. Another exciting way that you can take action with us is through our Challenge for Green Futures program and our partnership program. The Challenge for Green Futures program is something that we launched last fall, where it provides an opportunity for faith communities who are interested in learning about environmental justice, environmental issues, gives them an opportunity to learn more about that and kind of become the environmental expert for their faith community. So as you work your way through that program, we have various workshops about different topics, some that we mentioned today, and which can eventually lead to a partnership program that we do have as well. And someone who can help navigate you through these different options is Reverend Ralph Hodge, who was on earlier. He's a great person to talk to about if you're interested in environmental work and trying to figure out what you can do to get involved, right? So now we're here at questions. And I haven't looked at the chat box yet, so I see there's some items in there.
Yeah, I dropped the Faith Climate Voter Pledge into the chat, Leah.
Oh, okay, great, thanks. Okay, cool.
So any questions, or it doesn't have to be questions, it can also be comments.
So how can we become involved in the Challenge for the Green Future, the partnership program? What's needed to become a part of that partnership? Because
so
I would, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, if you have more, please.
No, I was going to say, I very much would like to see the church get more involved in this. This has been, I mean, some of this stuff I knew, but gosh, a lot of it I didn't, and it's been an eye opener, and especially when it comes to right here, right, and we're located. The church is located in the Jackson Ward area. And you know, I never thought about that urban heat island. When you said that, I mean, I said, what is that? You know, but it makes sense after you know, when you think about all of the concrete and the pavement and not many trees around. So I guess we can understand now why it's so hot when we step outside of the church. And I'm bothered a lot with allergies, and maybe that's why it affects me so much, you know, now, just being in areas like that. So I think we really need to become more involved and get those that are interested in this, and all of us should be, and being that our AME church is involved, and we should become more involved in our local church. So how do we become tell me more about that, the partnership.
Well, definitely. I think for now, I'll just say it doesn't take many requirements, mostly just interest and you know, commitment to wanting to find ways to involve your faith community in environmental justice work, environmental work. And like I said, as far as next steps in genuinely pursuing that, you can talk with Reverend Hodge about that. And we have his contact. Oh, I'm sure you may have his contact information already, but it's listed later in the presentation as well. Okay. So we'll share all of this afterwards.
And I've also dropped a link in the chat box that directly takes you to the partnership program, just more information about it. There's also a form online that you can sign if you're completely sure. But if you're not, of course you can talk to Pastor Hodge.
Okay.
Oh, and then the other thing, speaking of allergies, I suffer from allergies too. The Science Museum of Virginia has been doing a lot of really interesting studies looking at pollen and climate change. Dr. Jeremy Hoffman, he's found I think he's just been looking at maybe the past 10, 15, 20 years, so it hasn't been super long timeline, but he's seen that in recent years, not only has it been getting warmer sooner, so of course pollen's coming out earlier, but also just the amount, like the concentration of pollen, it's getting higher. So it's so, like, if you think about that in terms of your allergies, you have them longer, and also they're worse. So that's longer people have to buy Claritin or Zyrtec.
Sure.
So,
there's a question in the chat.
How do we balance the issue of climate change's effects on our food supply and the fact that the food animal products we eat have such a negative effect on the climate, from manufacturing or growing crops to transportation? That is a really big challenge. The agriculture sector is one of those that definitely is contributing to climate change. We don't, so we have some of our top issue areas, and so we haven't been doing work directly on agriculture and reducing emissions from agriculture, but we do have some resources. For instance, we have a faith and food guide that kind of at least starts congregations on the path to reflecting. Also, I see starts faith on the path to reflecting, how, they can be more responsible stewards in terms of food. And also I see someone has a comment in the chat. I don't, Veronica Carter.
Did you
Okay.
want to?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm sorry. Thanks. I just wanted to share that when Kendyl, I believe, was talking earlier about air and so forth, I wanted to share that in the 90s, I lived in LA. I lived out there for 11 years. And what really, really surprised me when I got there, you've heard about LA traffic. Well, you could literally go to work in the morning, dust off your car, as well as dust off your dining room table. And when you got off at the end of the day, the dust on your car would be an inch thick, as well as in your house, the same amount of dust in your house. And so that would, and so getting off from work, that was a terrible time to be jogging, because you'd be taking all that exhaust into your body. And so people used to say to me, "You're leaving that beautiful place?" And I'm like, "Yes, because that beautiful place is killing me." I got a fungus disease from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, inside and out, in my ears, in my eyes, from all that pollution and at the swimming pools and so on and so forth. So it's real. For those who want to say it's not, it really is real. I've seen it and experienced it. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah. I wanted to comment also on young people. We're seeing young people very engaged in climate change. And we've seen it on television or just around in general. And I know COVID for the last year and a bit have kind of, stopped things a little bit, somewhat. But I guess my comment is, in people generation ages, let's say 40 and up, it's like take a number with the things that affect the lives of Black people. And so I guess my question to you guys is, before COVID, or maybe looking forward down the road, programs, you start with that younger generation and educating them, because when you start there with them, you're growing up a new generation of people who are actually really involved and interested and afraid that climate change can affect their lives, because this is going to be on them. So do you guys have programs for that, educational programs that can get into these schools once we get to rolling again to educate our youth?
Yeah, so our mission is to really try to support people of faith. And so I'm sure if we have the opportunity, we would love to get into schools. Yeah. It really is just it's been hard because of COVID to kind of get the word out. But now that things are opening up again, we're hoping to get in front of as many eyes and impact as many ears as we can. So we would love to have that opportunity to talk to young people. Because this issue, Leah, I'll let you, you're younger than me. You can speak to this issue's importance to young people.
No, yes, I think, I was just going to say that even from when, right before COVID hit, I was teaching actually this school program where I would teach children about gardening and nutrition. And even with that program, just seeing the way, because we were also, I taught at a couple of schools in the south side of Richmond. So these are predominantly Black students, Latinx students, and literally even in that program, just hearing the way that, kids talk about food, but then also talk about being outside. And what's ringing in my head right now is the quote that Kendyl mentioned earlier from, I think, the Roots article, which was, people see the environmental movement, environmental work as something that's for white people.
Yeah.
Same thing with vegetables. And that's actually something that I'm really passionate about. Why can't I have to be white to like kale? No, I don't.
No.
And to realize that it's good for me and be happy about that, right? That's totally taught. And for whatever reason, we told the Black community, not for whatever reasons, there's multiple reasons, right? But I think we just have to remind ourselves as the Black community that we do have a right to the environment, and we have a right to care about it. We have a right to make it a priority for us.
Thank you.
And it is, yeah. So I think, oh, thank you. But also, real quick, going back to Donna, I didn't get the chance to say, but if you want to do anything to address like food and animal products and that effect on your own, an easy way to do that is just to shop locally, buy fresh produce from local farmers markets. I know there's quite a few, and Reverend Hodge, actually, Pastor Hodge is about to open up one with his church. So
okay. Good idea.
And I also know that with and mainly with my question was around, because I've read a little bit about the effects, and mainly I think animal products, meat, and the negative effects that it has in the manufacturing and transportation of meat on the environment. And I guess another reason for eating clean and, organic and the kinds of foods that you're talking about. And thank you for the link. I got it, and I actually pulled it up so I could save it. So thank you.
Of course. And if there are any, kind of going back to our mission, if there are any resources, or if you all have any additional questions, or if you just kind of need someone to help think through, okay, what would be a good project for our church, we're very happy to, help in any or all of those ways. Okay. If you think, oh, it would be great to have a resource that specifically says this, then let us know, and maybe we can work on it. Maybe we can help. Yeah, because that's why we're here. That's why we're here. That's really our. So I don't know if we have time to do the closing prayer. I see that we're already a little bit over at 7:32.
Sister Rita?
Yes, we can close with the prayer, yes.
Yes. And before we close, I have one other question. It is of interest to me. This work that you're doing, Kendyl and Leah, are you finding that Black people are becoming very much acceptive of this, of what you're doing, and seeking to make change, or is that slow going?
It's slow going. Okay. It's slow going. Okay. Like
I saw Leah laughing at the time. So
it's slow going, but you can tell that this is an issue that's very close to Leah and my heart.
Yeah.
Because we're from the Black community. But it's been slow going. It's been slow going. Normally the congregations that reach out to us, are white congregations, and so but we keep plugging away.
Okay. Well, and so I'm glad that you are willing to come and to help us if we see fit and need, and I think we will. This, we've had a lot of town hall meetings, and they've been interesting, very interesting, but I don't think, as far as I'm concerned, this has been one of the most interesting ones, because it really impacts our lives in ways that we have not known, and to the extent of how it you know, the environmental injustice, I would say, has affected our lives. So I want to thank you for coming. I know the prayer may be the last thing that we do. So I do want to take this time to thank you ladies for coming. Thanks to Sister Willis for pulling this together. And I'm hoping that through social action that we can find some that's interested in this topic and want to do something and to make a change. So again, thank you all for coming. And I think sounds like someone else was wanting to say something.
Alvina. I just wanted to say that I appreciate you coming out and speaking with us today too. But I just had a comment. When I lived in Louisiana and I worked with Louisiana Primary Healthcare Systems, there's a town in an area, it's been on CBS on one of the evening shows, and it pretty much is Cancer Alley is what we called it, with the oil containers and different things in that community. And sometimes when we're addressing the community about environment, we have to really bring it home with how many people do you know in your family that died from different types of cancer? When I first came to Virginia, the main thing I noticed was how many trachs it was in the Black community. I kept seeing all these people with tracheostomies or scars where they had trachs before. And then I realized, wait a minute, you're in the tobacco capital where the tobacco farmers were. So it is important, but we do have to express, you know, to our communities how it impacts them directly and how many we've lost because of that.
So true.
We have a raised hand.
Yes. I don't know if that's me, but.
No, it's me. It's me. I'm sorry. And I just wanted to say, I've been just kind of lurking and watching, but I did want to say that we're so proud and excited that we just were able to hire Ralph Hod as our faith outreach manager. And he will be following up specifically with faith leaders to help them think about how they can institute entire programs in their community, in their faith community. So he'll follow up with you as well.
Okay, that's great. That's good. I think Sister Ryan Alvina was trying to get in. Sister Ryan?
I just want to say thank you for educating us. And I think I got a double dose of, I grew up in Jackson Wall. Now I go to church in Jackson Wall, Jackson Ward. So I just want to make that comment. So.
Well, and there's one question, I think, in the chat box. Dr. Dawson says, can we access the data regarding the environmental inequities that affect minority communities historically and currently?
I wanted to say, well, about a specific issue or just in general ever? Because funny enough, haha, surprise, I don't think there are that many resources that show that. The first tool that's coming to my mind is the EJ map that the EPA released.
EJ screen.
Yes,
and
the
if
EJ
folks are interested in EJ screen, well, I don't know if we should go into it today, but I can do like a walkthrough. If Michael, if you're interested, we can do a walkthrough of EJ screen. We don't use it too often, but it is a pretty cool tool that we have used in the past, and it doesn't really, I don't know if there's historical data in there, but there definitely is current data. And you can kind of track and see, you can decide what type of pollutants you want to look at, air, water, what have you, and what neighborhoods, zip codes, and all that. It's very comprehensive.
Yeah, it helps put everything in one place. Because I think there is data out there. It's just kind of scattered, you know, related to subject area.
And then sorry, I got excited, Leah. And then
no, be excited. I was just saying, you know, whether it be transportation, asthma, redlining,
Yeah. And one thing that we're pushing for the state of Virginia to develop, there are other states that actually have like a state-specific EJ maps of what EJ communities there are and what issues are facing those communities. And Virginia doesn't have that yet. And so that's one of the things that we've been advocating to our state decision makers for. But I did drop a link to EJ screen in the chat.
Okay.
Okay. All right. We're going to close with the prayer. You want to go ahead, ladies? Thank you so much.
Yes, indeed.
Creator God, you who set the stars, the sun, and the moon into place, we praise you. The God who formed the earth and gave mankind dominion over it, we thank you for entrusting us with your creations. Father, in many ways, we have fallen short of your expectations. Please forgive us for taking your creations and your gifts for granted and for misusing and abusing your land, causing climate change, illnesses, and diseases that impact all ages. We right now humble ourselves before you, dear Lord, and ask for restoration of our health, our minds, our spirit, and healing of your land, that we may live in a healthy life you plan for your children. This we ask in your precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Oh, yes, this has been great. Sorry, real quick, literally last thing for real. This is just, we'll share all these resources with y'all, but once again, we have a link to our mailing list and just a couple of our upcoming events. We actually have a workshop this Saturday for the Challenge for Green Futures program I was just mentioning, and anyone is welcome to come to that. That's the link to register, as well as a couple of other events that we have going on in the next couple of weeks or months.
Can you drop the links in the chat? We can't click these.
Oh, can we not share this afterwards? But okay. I'll share it in the chat.
And then we're also doing a really, I'm very excited about we're doing an EJ Now Juneteenth series over the next few weeks. And so we're thinking through, what liberating folks from, dirty air, what liberation from, dirty water looks like over the next few months. But that's a weekly show on Friday.
Okay, yeah, I put a link to our Facebook. And then also there is an event happening with with one of our partner organizations, IPL DMV. They do environmental work in the DMV area. They're having an in-person event for faith leaders to rally for 100% clean energy, if anyone wants to check that out as well. And then later in the month, in June, we're going to be at the BGC conference, the Baptist General Convention conference, if anyone wants to see any of our workshops there. So yeah, that's everything.
Great.
And here is Pastor Hodges' email for anyone who would like to reach out. But I'm sure he'll also be reaching out to you all as well. All right.
All right, great.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Okay, bye-bye.
Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.